Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session, Cultivating Connection, Building Trust in the Workplace of the Future with Morag, Barrett, and Ruby Vesely. Let me ask you, have you ever lost sleep worrying about how to deliver a tough message to a colleague? Thought you nailed a project only to receive feedback that caught you by surprise and stung a little? Or have you ever recognized that who you know is more important than what you know, but you realize you don't know who knows you? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you're going to enjoy our conversation. Morag and Ruby will share how we can't be successful in business or in life without successfully cultivating our professional relationships. Before we begin our discussion, let me share a bit about both Morag and Ruby. Morag is a celebrated keynote speaker presenting at conferences and events globally. As the founder of SkyTeam, an international executive development company, she's supported the development of more than 10,000 leaders in 20 countries and on 6 continents. Morag has been featured by Entrepreneur.com, Forbes, and the American Management Association, among others. And Morag is a member of the 100 Coaches, an organization formed by Marshall Goldsmith. Morag is also an award-winning author of 3 books, Cultivate the Power of Winning Relationships. Her second book is titled The Future-Proof Workplace. And Morag's newest book is You, Me, We, Why We All Need a Friend at Work, co-authored with her SkyTeam colleagues, Ruby Vesely and Eric Spencer. Ruby has worked across industries with several powerhouse organizations over the past 25 years and is a highly sought-out executive coach and leadership facilitator. She has worked in a diverse array of high-tech, nonprofit, and healthcare organizations before joining SkyTeam. Her passion is shaping exceptional organizational cultures, building amazing teams, and ultimately making life lighter at work. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to Ruby and Morag.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited for the conversation that Ruby and I are going to be having with you today. And the title, Cultivating Connection. Connection might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think about building trust or even in the workplace of the future. But in our experience at SkyTeam and for us at SkyTeam, what we've learned is that the quality of our relationships, the depth of those relationships, and therefore the trust that we build with our colleagues is at the heart of everything we do at SkyTeam, but also research and our experience has shown time and time again that it is the secret to success, whether you're thinking about your career, your team, or your organization. And as a leader, wherever you are in your career journey and wherever you might be on that mysterious org chart of your organization, understanding how trust works and how to build it is essential. And understanding how trust works and how to build it, especially when we're working in this hybrid environment over time, space, and distance, it becomes one of the critical competencies for the 21st century. You're only as successful as the people you lead. You can only be as successful as the people with whom you get to do this game of work and with whom you are collaborating. And so it's your responsibility, whether as a team leader or as a team member, to help create that environment where you and others can both thrive and perform at your best. And if that environment has little trust or at worst distrust, then I can guarantee that your success is going to be undermined. But trust doesn't just happen by accident. It comes from being intentional in your relationships, intentional in how you show up, in how you choose to respond, especially in moments of uncertainty or where the risks might be high or where there's not one clear way forward. This is when trust really matters. And so in the next 60 minutes, Ruby and I are going to be sharing a few practical tools and resources that will help you to both talk about the concept of trust and extend trust to others, but also be seen by others as that trustworthy go-to colleague that they can reach out to, especially in times of need. So let's just start with some of the fundamentals. As you heard in the introduction, Ruby and I have had the opportunity to work with leaders from around the world. At last count, about 20,000 leaders from more than 20 countries and on 6 continents. And one thing that's become clear is trust is something we know when it's missing, because we start BMWing, bitching, moaning, and whining about what others have done at work, but can be hard to articulate in terms of, well, how do we go from zero to deep trust? And I know at work, you're probably helping to develop increased revenue, reduced costs, improving customer satisfaction, increasing quality and reducing errors, whatever your role is and contribution to the organization. You have clear processes, systems, measures of success. And trust is what enables you to achieve those results. It is, as you see from this quote from our book, You, Me, We, the duct tape that holds a team together in times of crisis, and the WD-40 that helps things to move effortlessly on sunny days. However, if Ruby and I were to ask you right now to go and produce some trust, to go deep and trust with a colleague, what would you do? What would be your first step? And we know that that's a little trickier, but you're not alone. And when it comes to trust, leaders we work with often struggle to define it or to explain how to build it, but they know when it doesn't exist. And so our question for you as we go through our time together is to think about, are you building the trust you need in order to get the results that you are being held accountable for? Because trust happens in the moments between the work. It's at the heart of an ally mindset, and the research and the concepts we share in our book, You, Me, We. And it's so important that we've dedicated a whole chapter to this topic in that book. But Ruby, as we get started here, what would you add to just this baseline of where people struggle with trust?
I love everything that you said so far, and it always makes me think about the work that we do as leaders. We're always thinking about the business results. What do we've got to get done? What's our strategy? How are we going to get that work done? But equally as important is that people side of the business, how we show up as leaders, how we connect with the people around us. What we've learned in the work that we do is if we don't get the people side right, we don't build trust and connection, we're missing out on amazing results. We may be able to get the work done, but I always wonder what's possible when that trust and connection is missing. And it's that people side of the business where the innovation sits. It's the human part of our business, the creativity. A lot of times it's where the hidden obstacles are in our businesses as well. So as leaders, we've got to elegantly balance both of these pieces, and knowing if we don't get the people side right, we'll never be able to get the work done.
It's interesting you talked there about the benefits, and I was reading an article at the weekend that talked about the cost of a lack of trust, the cost of disconnection within the US economy alone was close to $500 million. And that number just blew my mind, because on the other side of that coin is, well, what are the benefits? When trust is high, what does the research show? And while we know it's always been key to organizational success, recent research that I was looking at from Deloitte that describes high trust organizations, those that are deemed trustworthy both by their employees and their customer base, outperform their competitors by more than 2.5 times. That engagement, our willingness to lean in, is 79% higher in those high trust organizations than compared to the average or low trust organizations. So if you think about what you just shared there, Ruby, that elegant balance between the what we do and how we relate, especially on the tough days, I think this is even more key. It's what are we doing to create an environment, a workplace where people feel comfortable to take informed risk to help move the needle in a way where they're not fearful for the potential consequences and black mark that might come with it. And collaboration and teamwork also increases in those organizations where there's high trust. I'm more likely to pick up the phone and ask for help, ask those clarifications, offer help, and take that help when it is offered, which ultimately reduces the friction, the silos that might otherwise slow down information, undermine decision quality, and as a result, impact the business results that we have. But this is all very well. I mean, yes, yay for organizational benefit for those of us who might receive bonuses, might receive stock options based on the performance of the company. Then it's in our interest to create a high trust environment. But there are also innumerable benefits that impact us all as individual human beings. And these are just 6 of them that Ruby and I have picked out to share with you today.
So as you look at these benefits that we have, when we're in a high trust relationship or we're in a high trust team, our influence in the organization is so much greater. We're able to really work with other people and share our perspectives, and we have people who are on our side to help support us. We have allies. We also get more information as leaders when people trust us and we're in these high trust environments. And not only the good information, we'll also get those warning signals as well. People will give us the warning of impending doom if they trust us and they know that they can come to us with anything. And of course, we get higher results. Our reputation is stronger as leaders. We become the leaders that people within the organization want to have on their teams. And the thing that really stands out to me is this last one, right? It's lighter at work when we have high trust relationships and we work on teams where we really feel safe and connected. It's way more fun. The stress goes down. There's also some research I saw that we actually have 36% higher overall life satisfaction when we're in these high trust relationships. So think about that, right? How it feels at work, the connection that you have at work impacts you at home. And we know that the relationships at home impact you at work. So this is good for the longevity of your life. I mean, you can Google this and find so much data and statistics around how being in strong workplace relationships impacts your whole life. Anything you would add, Morag, to this one?
Well, I love what you said there, because I mean, again, I remember early in my career being told, you leave your personal life at home and this is a business and you have to be professional. But the reality is we're all wearing multiple hats and they impact us and they impact the energy that we bring into the organization. And if we're feeling fearful or uncertain about our role on this team, then the courage to lean in and ask, why have I been invited to this meeting? What role do you need me to play? Can help to reduce some of that angst and help us to play at our best. And I'm curious, for those of you who are listening, I mean, we've just talked here about some of the statistics and benefits of being in a high trust organization, or benefits for us personally when we are in a high trust relationship and a high trust team. Just take a moment for us and just write in the chat, what are you experiencing right now in your workplace in terms of the upside if you believe and perceive that you're in a high trust environment, or maybe some of the challenges that you're observing as you look at the lower trust areas or the lower trust perhaps between teams and individual leaders. And Ruby and I'll read through those. We'll try and reflect back to them as we continue through our time together. And as with any of these concepts, a lot of this is ultimately common sense. We know we should be building trust with our team colleagues. We know we should be effectively onboarding new leaders and new team members into our organization. But what we find in our work is it's often an uncommon discipline. In that, in the rush and the speed of the 21st century, it's I'll get that next week. I'll get that after this project's complete. We'll sit down when you've had a little chance to get your feet under the table and work out the lay of the land. And I know that all of you are smart enough to work this out, the new rules of engagement on your team or in your company as you navigate through your career. But I'd ask at what cost and how long does that take? Michael Watkins, in his book, The First 90 Days, talks about it being an 18-month ramp to productivity for every new hire. What if we could shorten it by having the uncommon discipline to actually sit down and make sure that we are effectively onboarding people? And to make sure that as priorities shift, we are closing the loop on the communication so that everybody understands the rationale for that change versus that project that I have sunk heart and soul in for the last 6 months, the last 6 years, becoming essentially a black ops project that I continue to work on and therefore diverting my attention from the other priorities or the new priorities that I should be focused on. So when it comes to cultivating trust, it's common sense. Yes, we get it. But an uncommon discipline, either because we can't articulate, even for us personally, what causes us to trust or distrust others. And we don't have the discipline to sit down and do those things that we know we should be doing in order to communicate and remove barriers or obstacles to success. Which brings me to the third element of cultivating trust, which is we all need to be willing to discuss the undiscussables. That means when I'm sitting there at the end of a Zoom call, I've hung up and I've gone, oh, that'll never work. It's having the trust in my own understanding as to why am I concerned that this project is going to not meet the next milestone. And then following it through to have the courage to raise that concern, either one-on-one with my colleague or in our next team meeting, so that I can either be corrected on my misunderstanding or the team can say, me too, and we can work together to resolve the issue at hand. And if we don't, those few minutes that investing in how am I feeling right now, which we will come back to later, and having these conversations, discussing the undiscussables, can be the difference between a spiral that leads us to greater success or one that can suck us down into a maelstrom of finger pointing and blame. What would you add, Ruby?
I think if there was one message that I wanted to kind of double underline today, and it's that uncommon discipline and intentionality in this environment that we're working through. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, how it's changed over the past several years. That intentionality component has gone up significantly. We've got to keep our eye on the ball around building connection and trust every single day. So if you can take one thing away at the end of our presentation today, it's going to be, what's that one thing you want to apply uncommon discipline to in either one relationship or one team that you're working with?
I love that call to action, Ruby. But I'm going to pause here. And again, audience participation. I'm curious as to, even now that you recognize we're going to be talking about trust, you knew that when you came into this session, but who do you trust? Who do you trust now and why? What is it that they do, or what is it about how you show up that causes you to give trust to that individual? And by all means, share some of those insights in the chat if you would like. But we want you to be thinking about real world relationships, both in the workplace and in life, so that you can apply the concepts that we're sharing and think about how you can make additional deposits into your trust account and where you may need to modify or ask for what you need in order to strengthen that relationship. So, Ruby, I'm curious, when it comes to trust, who comes to mind for you?
A few people. I think of you. You come to mind instantly. I think of Eric, our colleague, who we wrote the book with, your most recent book. But I also was thinking about a previous manager I had. Her name was Val. And it was my early 20s. And I remember how a few things that she did. She trusted me. She gave me trust before I even necessarily deserved it. I thought, she gave me responsibility for projects where I thought I had no business doing that, especially that early in my career. And she was there for me and listened. And I also think she cared about my whole life. In the time that I worked for her, my father was really ill. And so I was able to actually be with him, and she supported me in that personal effort with clear boundaries around it. And at the same time, she held me deeply accountable for the business results. And I really respected that in her. And just so I guess to summarize it, right? She was there for me kind of my whole life, she thought about me, a whole person. And she gave trust first in that relationship. That's who I think of.
That you taught there that you could show up as your whole self.
Yes.
That you didn't have to keep your father's illness separate.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and I think this is a common mistake that less experienced managers will make, is that in extending trust, empowering colleagues, that you have to, in some way, lower standards. And you've just shared there, she still held you accountable for the results you were expected to deliver, but maybe gave more flexibility in the how and where you went about delivering those results so that you could focus on the and of work and the needs of your dad and the family at the time.
Yeah.
Love it. So I have a question then. In terms of that, if you think about Val, and yay, go Val, and as you're all listening to this, you've got your go-to trust person, and maybe they had some of the similar behaviors that Ruby just described about her colleague and her boss, Val. So it sounds to me that if you had a work issue, if you didn't know who to go to or how to do something, Val was your go-to person.
Definitely.
Okay. So what about this, though? Would you invite Val to come and cat sit? I know you've got 2 cats. Is that right?
I have 3.
Three cats. 3 cats at the moment. So would Val be somebody that you would naturally turn to be a pet sitter for you?
Yes, I would trust her to be in my house and take care of my pets. However, I wonder if I would be willing to actually ask her to do it, to ask for help in that regard. That would be different than a work issue.
Okay. All right. So how about this then? How about Val and managing your finances? She's going to invest on your behalf in the stock market. She's going to have co-signing on your checking account. Where are you now in that trust level?
Maybe like 5 out of 10. It feels a little more vulnerable for me.
Okay. So it's not that you distrust her that she's going to run off with your money, but she's not the expert that you want to rely on to squirrel away things for your fun days and the rainy days of the future. All right. Yeah. Okay. So we talked about, you trust her with the keys to your house. What about the keys to your car?
Maybe. Given the circumstances or context, yes.
Okay. What about the keys to your heart?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what we're trying to demonstrate here is trust is a complex concept. Yeah. And yet we use this one word, trust, to, in theory, cover a number of different scenarios. And trust is based both on the individual, the human, and there are going to be people that you meet in the corridor at a conference where it just seems like you connect from the get-go. And you might be yeses to many of these different scenarios. But it is also possible, a bit like Shrek. I always think of the donkey. It's like an onion. There are layers that you can trust completely in one area, but it would be inappropriate to trust a colleague in another. But often there is an overlap. And are you being deliberate, thoughtful, and proactive in where we are offering trust or asking for help, even on the cat sitting? Even asking, because that's how you deepen the relationship and move forward together. So trust is about the person, it's about the situation, and it's about the context. Have you let me down in the past? Was that let down because I didn't articulate expectations? Was it because of a lack of training? Was it because of a lack of alignment and clear goals? Because if there's been a pattern of being let down, then again, it doesn't mean I have to withhold trust, but I can still give trust, but within perhaps slightly modified guardrails. Which brings me actually then to the opposite side of the coin. So if we talk about who we trust and why, then it's as important to understand who do you distrust and why. So can you think of an environment or an example, Ruby, where you've lost trust? I mean, I've certainly had colleagues in the past where trust eroded over time until it was non-existent. Happy to share that. But what about your experience?
Yeah, this makes me think of one, it was a peer, it was a stakeholder in a project that I was doing. And I remember she brought me some tough feedback the first time in a small group of people. And then the second time where she had some tough feedback, it was in a more of a public facing event where I was put on the spot. And so I never knew what I was going to get with her. And it felt like she only brought forward the tough feedback. I didn't know necessarily what was going well, what was working in the relationship. And what I recognized is that if I had a meeting with her coming up, I would get anxious for days beforehand. And it would actually impact my work on other projects. It was almost like after that meeting was over with her, then the floodgates would open and I could continue in the flow of my other work. But it really got me into this emotional kind of freeze reaction in my life. And it was difficult. So it was her unpredictability and the mostly negative interactions that I had with her that really landed in powerful distrust. And the bummer about it is that she actually had a very powerful point of view that was different than mine, that I actually needed, that would have made my work better, but I couldn't hear it because I was so anxious.
I think about my own experience of losing trust with a colleague, and it started so well. It was earlier in my career, and we were at a similar level, similar experiences, and appeared on the face of it to have the same values and beliefs. But it became apparent fairly quickly that either she distrusted me or our styles and communication styles were so different that I started to distrust that she trusted me. And so a bit like you described, I remember getting onto calls. If I saw the phone number come up, my immediate thought wasn't, oh, goody, I wonder what's happening next. It was like, oh, God, what now? And so you start to become triggered and attuned to being defensive or being overly offensive, not in a rude way, but in a proactive way to try and head off bad news before it arrives. And on reflection, her checking in on me, on the work that was doing, was symptomatic. And unfortunately, it felt like micromanaging. And instead of having that undiscussable conversation that recalibrated and reset, we both let it fester. And so here's the bottom line. When we don't trust, you don't get the best vision, innovation, enthusiasm, respect, engagement. You get less than. We start to filter, we start to modify in order to protect ourselves from others. So food for thought. You're at the moment all listening to this and thinking about your colleagues and who you trust and who you distrust. Maybe there are people on this call who work with you. And I'm curious as to where, rhetorically speaking, they may assess their relationship with you and what might need to happen in order for you to recalibrate and move forward together and be more effective. Now, as I said earlier on, we use the word trust loosely to describe the art and science of relationships across time and in different contexts. And I want to be clear that we're not suggesting that you need to give blind trust, essentially gullibility at its worst, but blind trust to everybody. But we do want you to think about informed trust. And if you can articulate those emotional and situational triggers that build or destroy trust for you, then you can, one-on-one or with your team, be articulating this is what success looks like. And listening to what their own expectations and past history is so that you can then move forward together. But trust is a spectrum. We can move around this circle. And as you heard with Ruby's experience with Val, you can have informed trust, you can have complete trust in the work setting, but maybe it becomes towards the mistrust side when it comes to dog sitting, cat sitting, having access to your finances. And knowing where those limits are allows you to be proactive and choose how you want to respond and move forward together. But I know you talked about this earlier on. There's been a seismic shift in the how and where workplaces happen. If you think back before the pandemic, we had a shared experience in terms of we went to the office, and if my spidey sense went off that said, hey, Ruby, something's up, then there were numerous opportunities for me to swing by her desk, to stop at the water cooler, to just pick up the phone and to perhaps go and grab lunch and to start making deposits into that relationship bank account that helped me to understand what was happening for her and to help share what's happening for me. But of course, we then had the pandemic and we all emergency evacuated from the office, grab your laptop and your bag, go home. And when everybody's on the camera, we have a similar experience. However, if you're anything like Ruby and I, my guess is that you have fake perkied through a number of Zoom, Google Team, Hangout meetings and hung up at the end and felt completely drained. Or maybe moved from one to the next without even a moment to regather your thoughts and your energy. And so over time and distance, this goes back to what Ruby said earlier, we need to be intentional in creating scheduled spontaneity of checking in, not just on what our colleagues are doing, but how they're doing, so that we can very quickly realign if that feeling of I'm feeling disconnected, I'm feeling excluded, I'm feeling distrusted before they become an issue that undermines success. And now that we're back, it's a lumpy experience. And the number of times I've been in meetings where you've got some in the room and some on the screen, and that makes it hard. Because my guess is some of you are multitasking right now. And so here's a tip. Stop it. Either watch the recording later when you can give it your full attention, or move the keyboard, close the tabs, remove those distractions. Because as soon as we look away from the camera, as you can tell, I'm doing it now, I'm no longer looking at you. Now the question is at the back of your mind, explicit or implicitly, is am I checking my emails? We see your shoulders going because you're now focusing on typing. And I'm thinking, well, does this mean that my opinion doesn't matter? And I'm feeling disrespected. And so you're eroding trust from the very minute that we do it. Ruby, what's been your experience of the lumpiness of in and out of office?
I was thinking about this, and I feel like as a collective, we've become more brazen or more bold with our multitasking in a way that we would not do if we were sitting in an office together looking at each other. It's way more obvious. And we know that we can't do it when we're in the same room, but yet we're having the same type of conversations and the same kind of meetings in this lumpy environment. And we're trying to do that old way of being in this new environment. And like you said, Morag, people feel really unseen and they don't feel heard. And so our ability to be deeply present in this lumpy environment, it requires even more intention and focus because there are dings going off, right? Our cell phone, my doorbell just rang, right? There's a lot of things happening all the time. And so being really intentional and focused is even more important now and when we're trying to build connection.
And it made me chuckle because the title for this session is about building trust in the future workplace. Well, here's the secret. Having written the future-proof workplace and the 6 strategies there, the future of work is today. Don't think that you have the luxury of time to think about how you need to adjust, how you're showing up in person, whether that's in 3 dimensions or 2 dimensions through the camera. because the pace of change, the spectacular rate of change that we're experiencing right now is only going to continue to accelerate. I mean, you think artificial intelligence, anybody, and the impact that that's having on how we work together. The number of meetings I'm turning up and there's an Otter AI or some sort of remote recording device that is causing it. And of course, I don't know where that's going. I don't know how that's going to be used later. And it causes me to hesitate. I can only imagine that some of you are doing the same. So it's about having these conversations around what worked before the pandemic when we were all in the office together. Maybe the good practices, if you were already on a hybrid team and used to working remotely, it's what are the learnings? And let's make it explicit on how do we want to collaborate, especially when we've got this lumpy, some in the office, some out of the office, so that we can ensure a high quality, high trust experience for everybody. And if you're sitting there thinking, yeah, but I never get to go into the office, I don't get to see my colleagues in person, then you're not alone. In our research for the Ally Mindset profile, 20% of the leaders who've responded, and we've had more than 1,000 leaders who've completed it, so they have no friends at work. That, to me, a whopping 20% says low trust environment. If you haven't got at least one friend at work, that ally and go-to colleague, then trust is being undermined. It gets worse, though. 44% of leaders don't trust their co-workers. In fact, I just did a LinkedIn poll asking about trust as I was getting ready for this, and 57% of the people say that they only generally somewhat trust their colleagues. So it's being repeated right now. And then 67% of leaders tell us that their success has been undermined by the words or actions of a colleague. So these are all withdrawals that are coming from that trust account. And if we're not careful, that trust account is going to go overdrawn. And as we've already touched on, in the 21st century, if you've ever fake perkied your way through a Zoom call, you'll know what I mean. Technology only gives us the illusion of connection, and we need to be leaning in. Ruby and I were working with an executive team just a couple of weeks ago, and one of the suggestions that came from the team is, well, we need to start another Slack channel, hashtag cats at home. And one of the leaders was like, oh, good grief, no, I'm already juggling more than 100 Slack channels. So often it isn't about more. It's about what we're doing already and being thoughtful and diligent about how we experience collaboration, teamwork, whether that's on a one-to-one basis or a one-to-many basis. And that barrage of information, as Ruby already shared, whether it's the doorbell, the Slack messages, the notifications, the emails, all of that is preventing us from slowing down enough to get to that human connection where trust is actually nurtured. And I was reading a recent research project report from Owl Labs. They work on video conferencing and speaker material for conferences like this. And 58% of the hybrid employees who responded to their survey said they had coffee badged into the office. And that was a new term for me, Ruby, but I liked it. And what that meant is that presenteeism is starting to reemerge. Unless my jacket is on the back of the chair, there's a fear that I'm going to risk missing out on getting that next opportunity, that promotion, or the best projects. So coffee badging in is I'm turning up at the office long enough to grab a coffee, say hello, and be seen before leaving and going back to my own remote office. So think about that. The behaviors that it's driving and how that can undermine our ability to work together and to collaborate. So this isn't new. If there's one thing I'd like you to know, trust is not new. It's always been the underlying currency of work. And it's at the heart of every personal relationship, but it's also at the very core of our organizational strategy. And as leaders, no matter what your job title, it may give you authority, but it doesn't guarantee trust. And trust is the key to innovation. If you're being intentional, if you're making deposits into those relationship bank accounts, it will start to reap the benefits for both you and your organization as a whole. So as we pivot, as we think about the challenges of the 21st century, force-fitting the in-person, in-office approach into this hybrid world is not the recipe for success. Instead, we need to be rethinking how we connect, how we collaborate, and making it work for all of those domains. And it starts with the 4 yeses.
So we wanted to talk through some ways to consider and think about what behaviors do we need to exhibit to put deposits into that trust account. What does it look like to be in a high connection, high trust workplace relationship, something we would call an ally relationship? So we're going to share 4 questions with you. And if you can say yes to them when you're thinking about one relationship that you're in that strong workplace relationship. So I'll go through each of these questions again. Have one person in mind at work and think about if you can say yes to these questions in regards to that person. So the first one is, can I count on you? Do you do what you say you're going to do? This is a pure credibility question, right? We make an explicit agreement. You're going to get me that presentation by Thursday. I get it on time, maybe even early. It's of high quality. That's, can I count on you? Do you do what you say you're going to do? The second question is, can I depend on you? And this one is a little more proactive. It makes me think of service-based leadership. This is when someone does something unexpected to look out for you, is the way that I see it. Do they call when maybe they don't need something? Do they send you some information ahead of time that you never even asked for, but you needed it? That's, can I depend on you? It's this more proactive looking out for one another at work. It always makes me think about my time in the restaurant industry when I waited tables and I had a certain section and I got paid. I got the tips for those tables. But I love those coworkers that I could depend on, who would walk by and grab dirty plates off the tables, or they would bring hot food out to my customers, knowing that they weren't going to get the tips, but that it made for a lighter work environment, and we looked out for each other, and it made our customers come back. So we call those 2 questions transactional, in that it's a pretty baseline, pretty good workplace relationship. And to really have high connection, high trust, we've got to do more. So the third question is, do I care about you? Do I know your story? Do I know a little bit more about you than what's required just to get the work done? Morag did something for me a couple of years ago, and I always think of this example that helped me know that she cared about me. I had some things going on in my family. I was worried about my aunt who was sick, and she sent me a random Slack out of the blue, and she said 2 things. How are you doing? How is your aunt doing? And it helped me know that she cared, right? That she remembered a conversation that we had previously, and she wanted to know how I was doing. So that meant a lot. That's, do I care about you? Do I know more about your story? The fourth question is, do I trust you? This is what we're talking about, right? This is the kicker of them all. Do I trust you to tell you that I don't know what I'm doing? Do I trust you enough to ask for help? Do I trust you enough to receive help? This is a real vulnerability piece. And we call these 2 questions transformational. And that when we can say yes to these questions in a relationship, it's a different kind of trust and connection. And we're not only asking these questions about everyone that we're interacting with, they're asking these questions of us. And so, Morag, what would you add to these 4 yeses, especially in this environment that we're in?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier, in that when we worked in the office together, my spidey sense would fire and I would know when something was off, and it would allow me to close that gap with a conversation.
Yeah.
It is harder to do that through the camera, which is why scheduling time, even if you're sitting on the sofa and somebody pops into your mind, send a text that says, hey, you popped into my mind. How are you doing? And that is a deposit that allows others to then choose how they want to respond and follow up. But these 4 questions, in our experience, in more than 20 years of researching what it takes to build ally relationships, high trust professional relationships, these underpin every single interaction, consciously or subconsciously. And so we're asking and challenging you to make it a conscious thing. Which bucket needs to be refilled or reinforced, either through your own actions to demonstrate to others that you are trustworthy, or in others, what feedback do you need to give in order to help them to meet your expectations so that you can give trust? And it starts with you. Waiting for others to get it, you'll be waiting forever. You've been through today's program with UKG. You've listened to this session. You already have some of the answers that are brewing in your mind that your colleagues aren't even aware of. And that's the 3 steps to building trust. Look up, being aware of where you stand, show up, and step up. So let's look at look up. Look up is that emotional tripwire that tells you that something isn't right. Either you're feeling excluded, you're feeling distrusted, or you're worried that your colleague who just said, yeah, I've got it, hasn't really got it and is about to drop the ball. And as a result, your reputation, your results are at risk. And so here's a simple, deceptively simple tactic that you can use as you go into those next Zoom meetings, as you're meeting with your colleagues, that gets to how are you feeling? And we used this with a leadership team only last week, and it resulted in a powerful conversation that uncovered some elephants in the room that had been holding this team back. And it's as simple as this. What's your number? What energy are you bringing in to this webinar? What energy are you bringing into the next meeting that you're going to? And where is it on the scale of 1 where you're running on empty, distrust, no trust, or potentially full tank, yes, informed trust, let's do this. And so it's just a simple pulse check. What's your number? Because then if you're coming in exhausted, overwhelmed, not able to contribute your best, how do you let others know so that they aren't writing a story that is potentially negative and personal and undermining you? So what's your number? Type it into the chat right now. Let's see. My guess is we're going to have the full spectrum who are listening to us today, and that is okay. The key here is now you know your number. What would it take to +1? What would it take to get you from a 2 to a 3 or a 7.5 to an 8? Because when you know how you're feeling, you can start to make a choice about how you need to show up in order to close that gap. What's causing you to hold back? What's energizing you in this particular circumstance, but not in the next, that allows you to continue to invest consistently in your relationships. Ruby, I know that your executive coaching client sent you an email last week. They were talking about a colleague that kept taking credit for their suggestions, their work, and that was undermining the relationship. What other examples do you have of some of those situational and emotional tripwires that can cause trust to be eroded?
I think it can even be as simple as canceling a meeting last minute, canceling a one-on-one. And where you're maybe canceling that meeting because there's something urgent that's come up at home, at work that you absolutely have to take care of. And if we don't tell the other person what's happening, as you mentioned earlier, we'll write stories about it. And if we repeatedly and consistently do some of these things that where we had no intention of creating disconnection, we can really get ourselves into trouble. We can break trust in our relationships.
So I love what you said there about that canceling one-on-ones or canceling meetings at the last minute. We've all been there. We've either done it or had it done to us. And it models for me that gap between intent and impact, because I don't think there's any leader that is deliberately setting out to create a low trust, distrusting environment. Yet when they do, they have an unintended consequence. And so that brings us from look up, what's the energy I'm feeling or giving in this moment, to show up. And how do I ask for what I want, but also listen for what others might need in order to close that intent versus impact gap? This first tool, you could use this in your one-on-ones and in your team meetings as an icebreaker. It comes from our friend at work, Leanne Davey, and her company, Three Co's. And she talks about just a simple start. At the beginning of the meeting, what do you need? Do you need ovation? Great job there, Ruby. Thank you for your help in putting together this keynote. Do you need inspiration? Hey, I have to deliver a keynote to a group next week, and I'm looking at how would you approach this topic? Are you looking for validation? Maybe you're listening to the trash talk in your head. Am I actually adding value on this project? Or are you just a 1, 2, or a 3 on that energy? You need resuscitation. You need help in order to getting to firing on all cylinders. And I loved this for the power of just creating a habit, using this regularly as part of your one-on-ones, as part of your internal stakeholder relationships, because this allows you to communicate to others. You can also use it to learn about others, but also using what we call the connection pulse check. So Ruby, what about these 3 questions? How do they help us to understand what others might need?
I think the power in these questions are asking them consistently. So this is a tool we recommend for building connection, building trust, and asking in your own words, right, of the other person, what's working for you in this relationship or in our partnership? What's not working? What's something that's getting in the way? And is another way to say it. And ultimately, what's one thing I can do to help us be successful? Essentially, that's a what do you need? And Morag, actually, I love that you use these in our one-on-ones. So you use some flavor of these questions in the time that we spend together. And I know it's coming. So what's powerful about that is if I need to discuss an undiscussable, I know that there's going to be space for it in our relationship, in our one-on-ones, in the work that we do together. So it's really powerful. I think consistency is key, intentionality and consistency.
And I love what you said there, because even with the best will in the world, there is going to be a point where trust gets broken or at least dented. Mm-hmm. Because in the speed that we're working, I will forget to call, I forget to respond, or you send a question and you're expecting an immediate reply and I don't get to it till tomorrow. These trust dents can be small or large. But by creating the space where we're regularly checking in and recalibrating, allows us again to make a deliberate choice, especially when trust gets broken, how and where we step up. Because that is what we can do, is how do we step forward even when there is tension so that we can repair the trust and create connection that stands the test of time. Here are just 4 areas that we'd ask you to summarize in terms of the concepts we've shared. First off is to go first, to be that ally, to give informed trust to your colleagues. And where you know you're already filtering and maybe withholding trust, to ask yourself why that might be so that you can be intentional about moving forward. Ruby, what would be some pragmatic tips and tools that people could use at this point in order to step up and cultivate trust?
As I think about being intentional and getting focused, it's so important to consider who are your critical stakeholders right now, given the work that you've got to accomplish in the next 3 to 6 months. And what are the quality of those relationships? And where do you want to explicitly be intentional about building connection? I imagine there's one relationship or one project where you can go first. So as you think about, again, this work that we're talking about, building connection, where do you really want to focus your time? And I love number 3 and 4, right? This idea of communicating and really being consistent and being explicit about how we're going to connect with one another. Am I going to contact you on Slack? Am I going to reach out to you on email? And in which instances do I use that? And what's the time frame that we're allowed to reach out to one another? It can really clear up some of these kind of these missteps that we make in our relationships. And I love number 4, be present. In the work that we do, we talk a lot about being deeply present with one another. There is nothing that can replace that when in when you're trying to build connection with another person. So as we've already said, right, turn off Slack, turn off your phone, put it on do not disturb, shut everything else on your computer, especially in this virtual environment, because I can see the subtlest of eye movements in this like close-up camera frame. So be present with one another, and even with yourself. Take a little bit of space to prepare for every meeting that you're walking into, even if it's 30 seconds. Your ability to slow down and be thoughtful in that moment can change the nature of the next interaction that you have.
And these last two are even more important in a hybrid environment. Communicate, because it can be easy to assume that somebody else has passed on the message. Well, better to communicate twice than not communicate at all. And be present. I know it works because some of my newest and deepest friends have been made through the Zoom camera during pandemic and are around the world, and people I've yet to meet in 3 dimensions. And it comes back to consistency. When we want to build trust, when we want to deepen our relationships, it's important to be consistent. And one tactic for this is daily questions. And I have a shorthand version of this. It's my sticky note here. These are my 5 commitments to me for this year. And it sits here on the screen as a reminder. And then I have these daily questions, which actually Ruby asks me these in our one-on-ones that she does with me, to make sure that I am moving intentionally for 30 minutes every day. Did I do my best to communicate clear goals and expectations? Did I do my best to use the tool we just showed you in terms of asking for what I need and listening deeply and with curiosity for what others might require from me in order to be successful in their roles? So we've talked a lot about building trust. It is, as we said at the beginning, the secret sauce to success in business and in life. But if there is one person that you need to trust more than others, it's yourself. And I'm turning to this wise sage, Winnie the Pooh, who said it so well, that you are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. And so when you do next hang up from your Zoom, Google Hangout meet and hit that red button and go, ugh, I'm not valued because no one's listening because I'm not having fun. You need to believe in yourself and take that first step to having those conversations, the uncommon discipline that allows you to get to a high trust relationship. It starts with you. It ends with you. And it's time for you to look up, show up, and step up when it comes to cultivating connections and building trust in the workplace of the future, which, as it turns out, is actually the workplace of today. Now, I know as we were watching all of the chat come up, there are questions and comments that we didn't get a chance to refer to. So feel free, please connect with us on LinkedIn. Feel free to email us. Consider us your friend at work, and we will happily follow up offline in order to close those steps. We thank you again for your time and contribution to what has been a fabulous event.